Welcome to Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we discuss Trump 2.0's policies and politics and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. Today I'm joined by Ellen Chang, a former U.S. Navy intelligence officer who went on to work on autonomous systems like Global Hawk and Triton at Northrop Grumman, and is now a leading investor in defense technology. We discuss her path from Taipei to the U.S. Navy, how autonomy and drones are reshaping modern warfare, and how venture capital has propelled innovation and commercialization in the defense industry over the past 10 to 15 years. Focusing on Taiwan, she explains why dual-use technology and new forms of public-private partnership are critical for Taiwan's defense, and how Taiwan can leverage its talent, geography, and industrial base in the era of AI-enabled warfare. Beyond Taiwan, she highlights the broader surge of investment in defense tech in Asia and Europe, and the urgency of impact investing, such as housing for the military community. Let's hear Ellen's perspective. So welcome, Ellen. We're so excited to have you for many reasons, not only about the topic today, about defense tech in Taiwan, but also you're a woman. I don't usually emphasize that, but I feel like it's so rare to see someone in that industry leading investments. So tell us how you got involved and a little bit about your career.
I think my whole career and my professional
Very cool.
has been very happenstance. I started my career after college in the Navy, and the reason I wanted to even join the Navy was for the scholarship.
For college or
Scholarship for college. So the Navy gave me a full ride and paid for University of Pennsylvania, which is pretty expensive. What you owe back to the Navy.
ROTC?
ROTC, Navy.
Okay.
Reserve Officer Training Corps is what ROTC stands for. You play Navy and then you go into your career upon graduation, and you have a commitment of 4 years at least. So I grew up in Taiwan. We moved back when I was 4. My dad went to the States for his PhD, and he was one of the first reverse migrants. So he went back in this early 70s. I went to Taiwanese school, public school, all the way up through 7th grade. And then I attended Taipei American School. And upon there, I came to the States going to University of Pennsylvania. And it was then I encountered a billboard to get your college paid for. It was an invaluable experience. It was amazing to meet people from around the United States, from every state possible. I joined as an officer. I had just turned 21, so entered into the intelligence field. And the training is all down in Virginia. You get indoctrinated on all the systems, and then pretty soon you go out to sea. I had about 3 tours with the Navy, mostly with maritime domain awareness. Then I went into the reserves. So I spent about 23 years with the Navy overall, to duty, and the second half as a reserve.
How did you pivot to being in the investment world?
My career's in 3 decades. So let's say 10 years active duty Navy. My second 10 years was actually with Northrop Grumman, so the aerospace corporation in the US. They build large weapon systems. I ended up joining the aero side. So I worked on drones. The specific drone is Global Hawk. It's a fairly complex system. People think of drones as small things. This thing had a wingspan the size of a 737. Its body is very, very long. It's a glider, flies at 80,000 feet, and it basically surveys the environment. And
Are they still around?
They are around here and there. Yeah, it's been an interesting program. The U.S. Air Force is the one that bought it. The Navy has several Triton. The Navy's version is called Triton. The Australians have it, so every once in a while, maybe they fly up towards Taiwan. I don't know. But this whole thing was autonomous. So I got really interested in technology because we were actually flying this thing using mouse clicks. This is 20 years ago, when we were really using this autonomous system, how the system would work in a maritime environment. I was defining the product, the system, so I was a systems engineer. Later on, I became a program manager, a director, so I understood how the government works here in the United States. After that, I left in 2015 for a variety of reasons, but one of the reasons was the surge and the rise of commercial technology that had dual use implications. So I got involved pretty early on looking at drones. At the time,
you mentioned 2015. Approximately around what time did you start to see the commercialized drone production?
I started to see glimmers of it in 2010 and 2011. These systems were not as small as you see them today, but they were generally a little bit more commercial. What really happened was 2014-ish, a company here in the US called 3D Robotics came on the scene, and all these hobbyists were trying to build these drones that then could be used for entertainment. So that catalyzed these ideas. And I think at that point in time, the Chinese company, DJI, started to get born. DJI had an advantage of having access to the broad electronics sector in Shenzhen. And the founder is amazing and did move pretty fast and brought the cost down. Essentially, that company owns 90% of the market.
It's interesting because I actually have quite a few friends who all came from the DJI world. If you look at today's Shenzhen robotic ecosystem, I feel like DJI was the ground grooming all these founders for today's robotics world. That's a separate topic. So around 2015, you left the defense contractor industry. Was it any startup you joined?
I founded a startup and pivoted it into an angel investment networks. And when I got out of Northrop, what I ended up doing was creating an accelerator because I found folks coming to me asking me about how to actually raise money by basically putting my nose into everything. I learned about the angel investment world at around that same time. And so that's where I started to gain some experience and capability of enabling, translating what we call deep technology companies today, hardware companies, to investors. And so I ended up starting an accelerator, Lightspeed Innovations, with another lady, Monica Jan, around space. We focused on space and drones, and we would cluster and find founders, and we'd host 6-month programs. And we actually got going. What I ended up doing was pivot that into BM&T, which I later joined. But I didn't want to lose all the relationships. So I created Syndicate 708. It's kind of the foundation and underpinning of holding all the private shares I have of probably 30 companies, 40 companies these days.
I'm very curious, from huge defense contractors to now many defense startups around the world. In fact, defense tech has taken off as a growing industry. What happened to the traditional defense contractor as a sector that allows so many new startups that can survive as a commercial startup entity rather than having to rely on huge money backing from the government?
So back in 2015, there was no such thing as defense tech. There was space tech. It was called Space 2.0, and most of the founders, Y Combinator, would not look at them. SpaceX did exist at the time, eventually Tesla and all that. So you see the burgeoning of a hardware ecosystem that's a little bit more product-oriented, non-government happening. I think a big shift happened in 2018-19 with COVID. We started to see how challenging the supply chains were then. And that's when some people like A16Z were very depressed at the United States' inability to build certain things that we needed just to facilitate healthcare. Along that same lines, they came onto the thought of American dynamism. They're a manifestation of a movement. 2019 is also when Anduril was founded. So Palmer Luckey comes out of Oculus and says, I want to do something quite different in national security. His inspiration doesn't come from Facebook. It comes from before that, because he had worked for the Army Research Lab way back. Palantir started to get a little bit more traction at this time. I had encountered Palantir way back in 2009.
Yeah, weren't they founded in the early 2000s?
Yeah, they were founded in the early 2000s as an intelligence officer, because they were an intelligence product. They would follow us around on the battlefield in Afghanistan and update their software in real time. So I was fairly familiar with Palantir back then. It's a different company now, but you start to see these seeds being planted. Elon Musk at the time was going on to his second company, right? He had SpaceX, he had Tesla. He was trying to keep both of them going back in 2012. Silicon Valley at the time, also, some folks started to think, hey, I want to build something different. I personally have experienced it getting a lot of attention around 22, possibly because some of the hardware companies started to get government contracts. And where this started happening was actually back in 2016 and 17. The Air Force, this person, Dr. Roper, started to say, hey, we really want to access commercial technology. At around the same time, the Secretary of Defense, Ashton Carter, he basically came to Silicon Valley, was looking at all the technology and said, how come the Department of Defense has no access to all this technology, right? And so that started to catalyze a movement. Defense Innovation Unit Experimental was born around that time. So you just see all these confluence of events happening around fairly in the mid 2015s timeframe. And then it just kept going and it started building. It's been 10 years in making. Why does this happen? It's because, well, the commercial technology also is falling in price. The commercial cycles are getting faster and faster. This goes back to why I even joined BMNT. BMNT is founded on the principle that commercial technology cycles are too fast for the government, and we need to change government culture, because whatever we do in the Defense Department, it's just not going to keep up with the 3-month to 6-month development cycles. And so people have been wrestling with, oh, how do we build exquisite systems, keep them safe, and how do we actually iterate on these small systems? I think we now see Ukraine has licked it, basically knocked it out of the park. They just have a continuous design, product enhancement, manufacturing system going.
That's because they actually have a demand. They urgently need to.
And they've been very creative at using these systems as a way to defeat the enemy. The venture equation, the venture side never wanted to invest in these until a few brave folks started.
Yeah.
Do that.
Who are some of the big folks?
At the time, it was A16Z, Bessemer. Tess Hatch was at this company called Bessemer. She comes out of space. I really attribute to the space sector, really. At that time, it wasn't about defense. It was just space, and everybody wanted to go to space. Goldman, Morgan Stanley. Bank of America initiated coverage on space. We're going to go to $1 trillion space. They were talking about space. And people were like, space for peace, space, garbage in space. And now it's shifted to, oh my God, bad stuff in space. And that started to like, oh yeah, we can actually do hardware. Anduril starting to raise money and at a fairly quick pace, breaking down some of the barriers and getting some contracts that started to actually move.
Very cool. Now, let's come back to Taiwan, because it's also trying to play a really interesting role. When did it bring you back to Taiwan, starting to pay attention to the defense tech industry?
This also was a little bit happenstance. So within BMNT, we have a defense and investors network, probably because of the space interest, and Foxconn was already looking at space. And this is back in 2022. I got a contact, like, could you help us with a select USA delegation visit to the States? So I said, sure, I jumped on the chance. So we ended up taking 20-ish companies that I still maintain relationship with.
They're more than space, or?
It was just a space. So, like, at the time, there was probably 6 or 7 different spin-off groups that came, like semiconductors came. There was another one that was communications. And that just started the whole relationship, I guess. Fate. I just get plugged back into all of these domains right in Taiwan.
Why was there growing demand in Taiwan for defense tech?
I wonder if at the same time, it might have been some of the US companies, venture-backed US companies, that decided they wanted to come to Taiwan and learn more about Taiwan, because to the folks in the US, Taiwan feels like ground zero. Everyone thinks 2027 is the day when the balloon goes up. And so now we're just on the precipice of 2027. Obviously, at the same time, China's getting more aggressive.
Since your involvement in the last maybe 4 or 5 years, what do you see happening in Taiwan? Because if you look at what the government's policies are, and they're very focused on developing their own defense tech industry, where are they?
I think they're learnings. And I think part of what we see today and what the budget requests that exist around drones and now maritime drones is one could point back to around September 2024. At the time, AIT ran a drone delegation. I had helped the commercial section source a bunch of US companies, and they specifically wanted to bring more defense-oriented drones into Taiwan. And generally, the defense side of AIT actually handles those types of transactions. But at the time, the commercial section took over, because our Department of War didn't know, are these commercial things or are they defense things? This is just 2024. It's not that long ago. So this dual use category can be a challenge to classify for government. At the same time, I would say our Defense Innovation Unit had established a relationship in Taiwan and started to work on something called the Defense Innovation Office in Taiwan. A month later, 20 or so folks, half of it was M&D, half of it was probably senior gray beards from Taiwan politics, came to the States and visited Defense Innovation Unit here in Palo Alto. At the time, China sanctioned all the drone companies that went to Taiwan in September. And then at the same time, these companies that did go started to talk to NCIST, and there were some MOUs started to develop. So that now we have this formula where, yeah, when you go to Taiwan, talk to NCIST, get an MOU, and you might be able to start collaborating. So that happened just about a year and a half.
Okay, MOUs are in place. What are the concrete? Are you seeing anything happening in the actual money flow, technology, exchanges?
It's hidden. I know there's small dollar amounts. Some of the MOUs actually have dollars behind them, is my understanding. You're starting to see some of the US companies that have MOU with NCIST or AIDC set up shop in Taiwan. So where this is advantage to Taiwan is that the supply chain in Taiwan is strong, fairly reasonably priced, and probably can be competitive. My personal experience is I found a couple suppliers directly competitive in price with China and possibly higher quality, right? But I think the supply chain, it's hard to navigate sometimes. You have to spend the time to understand if the supplier can actually deliver at quality, at scale, because scaling up is hard. It's labor, it's finding the people, getting them trained up. It's just like every manufacturing problem.
Are you seeing actual investments? Are there local companies, joint production? Like how do we think about this relationship?
I still see the investment in local capability coming from some well-known Taiwanese. There was a frustration that the M&D wasn't doing anything. So therefore the citizens are going to invest on themselves and actually build drones. So that was also happening in the background. What I do see from investment perspective, I'm not seeing a lot of external venture or other capital going into Taiwan to invest in Taiwanese companies. What I do see is venture-backed companies coming to Taiwan trying to look for partnerships. Obviously, they want contracts from Taiwan government, but they're also striking partnerships with local vendors.
What kind of partnerships, for example?
There's this concept that if you litter the Taiwan Straits with a bunch of robot boats, you can actually defend yourself a little bit better, right? You cause chaos in the Taiwan Straits. So that's called Hellscape. It came out of Admiral Paparo from Indo-Pacific. There's an initiative right now where Taiwan was looking at potentially buying all these drone boats. So CSBC is one of the key companies that has struck relationships and partnerships and MOUs with several different US drone boat companies. You saw it in force at TATDE last year, when this had been cooking for about a year, and all of a sudden at TATDE last year, which is the biannual kind of quasi-defense conference that Taiwan hosts, in the pavilion with NCIST, you had Anduril, you had Martech, you had a bunch of US companies all exhibiting at the same time. Is there money flowing? Yeah. The special budget got struck down that kicked the wind out of the sail. So I got a bunch of calls, like what's going on. But generally speaking, now there's conversations about those budgets being reinstated and hopefully maybe permanently.
Yeah, because I'm curious to know, other than government funding, right, which is a big part of it, will there be private capital? Some will come from Taiwan for sure, but will there be any coming from outside of Taiwan to invest in manufacturing capability?
If you're talking about US investors, I don't know. But what I do see is a lot of venture capital indirectly being spent on Taiwan industry just by virtue of Anduril. I don't know how much billions they've raised, but they need to build product in Taiwan. They're already sourcing from Taiwan. They're looking for batteries and everything. So indirectly, they're taking their venture capital and some of their revenues and paying for stuff, right? I haven't seen any Taiwanese company directly raise capital from a US venture firm. Thunder Tiger has a presence in Ohio. I don't believe that is a result of raising capital in the US.
When we say defense tech is pretty general, we talk about drones, we talk about robotics. What are the other products? Can you help people understand?
I found that this definition, people use it differently. The Raytheon thing as an actual missile system, I don't call that defense tech, but now people are calling that defense tech. I kind of equate it more with the startup tech companies. But if we just wanted to say just defense technology that ranges the gamut, even these exquisite areas of like weapons. There's loitering weapons, there's energetics companies, translation, the propellant for weapons, there's hypersonics. Space is actually driving some of that. The weaponization of space is starting to be a concern. Space used to be a free domain, weapons free, and then you have Russia shooting something down 7 or 8 years ago, and you have China messing with things. There's a realization that even space is going to be a war-fighting domain, and we're really concerned about it. So I think going back to your question, it's very broad. It's basically all of defense. I don't think we have a good solution for thinking about exquisite systems, meaning large systems that take time to build and you have to build them with quality and qualifications versus the very low cost drone that is attritable. So what if you lose $10,000? It's not designed to carry people, a lot easier to build. What I see people trying to do is make the large exquisite systems like these. I think they're too, it's not like these large ships will all of a sudden become like drone boats. I think the drone section or these new technologies provided an added option for the military commander.
It's clearly gotten a lot of attention that the US Congress has proposed a bill to help Taiwan develop the drone industry there. It's called Blue Skies for Taiwan Act. I don't know if you followed that. I'm just curious, from the US point of view, how does the US see the role of Taiwan? If you use Ukraine as an example, Ukraine has offered a new way for people to think about the future battle, even in Iran, because of the drones. Is that what it's thinking?
What I think it could do is two things. A stronger Taiwan can only enable a stronger partnership across Asia, right? Like the US is overstretched. When you're trying to fight wars in every theater, it's better for all of our partners to be stronger and more self-enabled.
Right.
I would say Blue Skies, I haven't read the latest, but I think there is emphasis on supply chain, right? So if you're enabling a drone industry in Taiwan, you might actually yet stimulate more so these companies that can build the components inside a drone and provide the demand signal to the local industry to start investing and tooling up. Because right now the demand is all over the place and everyone's like, I don't know if I want to actually like invest. Where I see some of the US mentality is they just throw themselves out there and see what happens, but Taiwanese don't do that. It might actually send a demand signal, maybe for some platforms, but also for the supply chain. From the US perspective, the US is very, very vulnerable. The supply chains are very, very atrophied. A lot of systems all have Chinese parts. If China just said, we're not going to sell anything else, all bets are off. And then I've heard the Ukrainians be concerned that because of their drones are mostly Chinese parts, God knows what information is getting back to Russia.
And we actually had an episode on Taiwan's defense budget. There's reservation around specifically the drone industry. What do you think Taiwan needs to do to demonstrate that it is serious about developing its own drone industry and in order to attract private capital? For example, like not passing the defense budget, did that pose any question to private capital, like in terms of Taiwan's resolve, or you don't think that really has any
I don't think, yeah, I'm not hearing any conversations around that. I'm just hearing the venture-backed firms wondering when their business development efforts can actually be concluded. I will say this company being involved with Taiwan is more as a show of cohesiveness and force and collaboration with Taiwan than about the money. Yes, there's money to be made. And so I don't know that the venture guys here matter. Now, with Taiwan and Japan and Korea and all the budgets rising, I will say you are seeing A16Z in particular. I know they just released a global strategy, right? Starting to put offices around the world, knowing that supply chains and partnerships are going to be a big issue and they want to be strategic about it. And they've chosen to open an office in Tokyo, which makes sense to me in Asia.
Well, we also see I think even JP Morgan,
SRI, strategic.
yeah, also said something about it. And obviously the NATO, all the countries are increasing their defense budgets. We're going to see a lot more capital
A
invested.
lot more. And there's a lot of opportunity, I feel, for countries in Asia that have an industrial base. Europe as well has not invested in their industrial base in decades. A lot of it's atrophied. There was the peace dividend. It was very hard for any conversations on both sides of the aisle here had conversations with the European partners saying, hey, you need to increase your defense budget. It's not quite fair that there's this subsidization going on. So it's to try to get the engine moving when you don't really have an engine or the engine needs to be oiled and tuned up. It's going to take a little bit of time.
Looking at Taiwan and comparing it to its neighbors, would you say there's nothing that stands out for Taiwan?
I think all countries, at least in Europe and Asia that I know of, are increasing their budget to include Vietnam.
Even Vietnam. Okay.
Even Vietnam. Like Singapore, they can paint a few differences that I know. In my work, South Korea has always been prepared. Why? They have North Korea right on the border. So they're very security minded. Like
Japan too, right?
Sorry?
Japan as well. I mean, in some way.
Japan, not so much. So Japan, it does have a ready force. We have forces there. So between Japan and Taiwan, the difference is that the US actually has forces in Japan and always has since World War II. And there's a lot of work together, right? Japan's military is pristine. It's well kept. They have a industrial base. In fact, when the US ships go over there and get maintained, they come back a lot better, right? Like they have an industrial base. And that's my learning. I'm like, wow, yeah, we need something like that back home. What has changed is their budget. It's on the trajectory to triple. Taiwan's going up too. What's similar in Taiwan with Japan is that the population is generally hard to convince and pacifist. So they also have like, oh, we don't want to talk about it. We don't think we need to do anything. It's just Takaichi is like, I don't know what you guys see, but I see China like interdicting with the JMSDF all day long. I don't know how aggressive China actually ever could be, but the fact that they have just a ton of ships and planes and nuclear capability, we need to reduce the tension. But the fact of the matter is that they're employing them in aggressive manner. And Japan's even started to sell their ships externally. They're selling it to the Philippines. I think they have contemplation of selling them around Asia. We're going to have to be integrated if we want to work all together. Integration and interoperability can be an issue.
I find it fascinating that you talk about your investing as impact investing. People normally don't equate investment in defense as impact investing. I want to hear, how do you see that?
If you're talking about capstone impact, it started around the time when sustainability was a thing, but even then, ESG, we thought S could be mean for security, was increasing even way back when.
What time period were you referring to?
2017, right after, because it's a unique firm in that it's an opportunity zone investment firm. It's a very US unique thing. It's a tax incentive. If you invest in an opportunity zone, you get to waive taxes.
What is opportunity zones?
These are zones in the United States, census tracts, lower income. The whole point was to invest in them to raise the standard of living. And so Capstone was doing that, but what we were doing was helping maybe military housing, no hotels. And then we actually have a partnership with the Navy in the maritime sector. So the Navy is a partner in one of our investment funds to then go improve the maritime sector here in the United States. So from that perspective, that's how we think about impact, is that we're trying to raise the standard of living and solve some of the affordable housing problem that the United States has, along with doing some good. There's a nexus with kind of the national security sector.
And that's affiliated with the military. That's why that's the national security.
It can be. And that doesn't always have to be, but it can be. And it's always about infrastructure. Like we're looking at like certain types of upgrades on the bases or even housing outside the bases. The military housing is a big problem. A lot of sailors and soldiers don't have really good housing.
And are you investing outside of those opportunity zones?
I say a lot of what I do, I am, because going back to Lightspeed Innovations, and I pivoted all the work with those startups into an investment syndicate. That's where a lot of my personal or startup investment comes from. That's where I actually gain a lot of experience and interface with a lot of the founders that are popping up, because generally if a founder has an idea, somehow I get on their radar. They want to chat with me. So I'm having a lot of conversations around interesting capabilities. In fact, just yesterday we ran a workshop around nuclear energy. So it can be used for space as well as terrestrially. And how do we actually bring that to the fore? I was talking to an X-ray company. You can use X-rays to do healthcare, but you can also use it to detect nefarious things in container ships. So I tend to look at these dual use types of companies.
I feel like all governments need to have that as part of their, if they're increasing defense budget, because it just sounds a better sell. That
Yeah,
you're not.
yeah, and generally that's the trickle down effect of at least formerly DoD. Like there's a lot of research. DoD used to be kind of the research engine of the United States, so in DARPA and all that kind of stuff. But most of what happens is that it's not for military use. It's just that they're investing in basic research, in science, invention, and then you unleash the goodness out there, and to pick up and then engineer and actually work through and reduce the risk into a commercial application. I feel in the U.S. we have great innovation engine. We atrophied on the scale up piece, on the manufacturing piece. That skill set is very much lacking. And that's where I see a good relationship and a good collaboration with our Asian partners. Taiwan, the fact that some of the companies I work with can look at a hardware design and say that's not going to work in practice, and you kind of do this cost down engineering and scale up engineering. That's not a discipline that's really here in the US anymore. And so that's where I see a lot of synergies in creation.
So for the next 5 to 10 years, what would you like to see happening?
I know what I don't want to see happen. I hope we don't have a war. I really hope this is all a lot of bluster.
We're still involved in the Middle East.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like we need to pull out. We need to just like tone down the temperature there. But I think the fact that we have some more awareness around security, I think that's a good thing. China has a lot of good cards to play. I think we need to balance out the leverage a little bit. So in 5 years, I hope to see a more evenly spread world, and Asia is still at peace.
And do you think we'll see much more innovation when it comes to dual use technologies?
We'll see some successes. In fact, our markets are so high right now that there's just general conversation about a market downturn. So I think there'll be a trend, and there's going to be continued education and interest. But I would not be surprised if there's a correction.
Certain people have certain perceptions about defense or defense tech, but you can articulate it in a way that it is less about one way or the other. It's quite balanced. So I appreciate that. What began with the space economy and disruptions to global supply chains pushed venture capital to pay serious attention to hardware and supply chain resilience. In a fractured world, with America less interested in policing the globe, we're seeing the rise of defense solutions enabled by innovative technologies. Ellen Chang's journey and experience offer a reality check on a world that must rebalance national security thinking and risk management in the face of intensifying geopolitical rivalry. This is Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we analyze the policies and political strategies of Trump 2.0 and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. Thank you for watching and listening. We value your feedback. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast. See you next time.